I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni viewer, and welcome to Omni at the movies, TV, streaming service, whatever you choose to call it for this one. I'm reviewing another season of a streaming series that's come out. Since I've still got my HBO Max subscription, I decided I would review the second season of Jellystone, because I reviewed the first season when that came out, and back when the first season came out, I was pleasantly surprised by it. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Jellystone is basically a series developed by C.H. Greenblatt, who's worked on stuff like Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Chowder. I think he did a little work on SpongeBob, but if you've seen one of his shows, you know he has a very twisted sense of humor when he makes a cartoon. And Jellystone is specifically what he did when he got access to basically the entire catalog of Hanna-Barbera characters that are under the Time Warner label. And this is like for the characters who are not the ones that Hanna-Barbera keeps going to, like Scooby-Doo and the Flintstones. Those two have been run into the ground by this point, especially Scooby-Doo. So this is for the characters like Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, Augie Doggy and his dear old dad, Jabberjaw, Loopy-de-Loop, Captain Caveman, all the rest, and any other character they can throw in, and they throw in a ton. And the basic premise is basically just, it's set in the town of Jellystone, and that's basically it. Anything can happen from that point onward. It is madcap, it is bizarre, it has a devil-may-care kind of attitude, and I thought it was great. It was exactly the kind of crazy, old-fashioned, ridiculous kind of animated comedy that I've been looking for a while now. In an age where so many animated series are trying to be like anime, this felt like a nice little throwback to the way things used to be. And it's kind of weird that it was the Hanna-Barbera characters who delivered on that. They have never been this crazy before. Yes, I did grow up watching these characters in syndication. Most of them anyway. There are some characters who pop up there which I've been kind of surprised to learn even existed, because not all of them got syndication back in the day. But I am familiar with them. I know that they were funny, at least to my young brain, but they were never this insane. And I actually thought it was kind of a nice change. Plus, it's not political. Like, it throws a couple of generalized jabs in there about, like, politicians being useless and stuff, but it's not woke, it's not trying to tell you who to vote for, or why you should support this particular action, or be against this particular mindset. It just wants to make you laugh, and it wants to make you laugh by doing whatever it possibly can. It doesn't just bring things to their logical extreme, it brings them to the illogical extreme. That's why I enjoyed the first season. So how was the second season? Well, the second season is more of the same. It continues that trend. I actually wonder if some of these episodes were meant to be in the first season. I, in fact, even wonder if this counts as a second season, or if it was just episodes they saved for later and they're calling it a second season. But whatever you choose to call it, I thought it worked out pretty well. May as well just call it Season 2 from here on out. So, one of the things that Season 2 does well is that it takes advantage of the fact that there are so many characters and gives them a little bit more to do. Like in the first season, even though part of the appeal, if you will, was that there were so many different characters all occupying this one space, and anything could happen to any one of them at any given point, the first season did settle into a rhythm of clearly showing who the primary characters were, and then having a secondary group and a tertiary group, so on and so on. And like the primary group was Yogi, Boo Boo, and Cindy. Secondary group was maybe Augie, Shagrug, and Yacky Doodle. I feel so weird saying these names out loud sometimes. And then you had a few extra excursions with Jabberjaw and Loopy de Loop, and eventually you got to a point where you had characters who were named, but you didn't necessarily have them featured. They were mostly there for the background, and some of them were the characters that were massively overhauled for this series. Because some of the characters here, they're not necessarily like their original selves. Some of them have been given new positions that change things. Some of them have been flipped to be female instead of male. And it felt kind of like, okay, if you're going to make all of these changes and you're just going to keep so many of them in the background, I mean, I guess it's aesthetically interesting, but could you do more with them next time? And Season 2 does that. Not like Season 2 is suddenly all the background characters being pushed to the foreground, but there's not as much focus on the Yogi, Boo Boo, and Cindy group, who I would say were like the alpha team in there. There's far more in terms of who gets attention. Like, for example, Squiddly Diddly, who is one of the gender-flipped characters, gets featured in 2 different episodes, believe it or not. Jabberjaw and Loopy get far more attention. They only had like a couple episodes here and there in Season 1, but they're featured a lot more in Season 2. And, well, I mean, like I said, not every character gets the spotlight, but it feels like more is made of the cast that they have. And you get a ton more cameos. Some of them are just there for a joke. Some of them move the plot forward. Some of them are just in the background. But it's one of those shows where if you're a die-hard fan of Hanna-Barbera, there's always going to be something that catches your eye and makes you go, oh, hey, they just brought that character in, or hey, I recognize those sort of things. And I realize that sounds sort of like it's going for the things I know brand of entertainment, but it's not that. The show is run by its humor. That is the driving force. And the humor, as I said, is about as zany as it can get. It's like, it's one of those shows where continuity does not matter. You can have anything happen. You can have characters get injured horrifically, or abandoned somewhere, or trapped, or arrested, or suffer some sort of horrific injury that cannot be reversed. Anything can happen, and by the next episode, it's all back to normal. That's the kind of idea that this show is running on. It's just bring things to the point where the episode just has to come to an end because there's no possible way it can continue, and then in the next episode, start again from square one. If that's not your brand of humor, then Jellystone probably won't win you over. But I will say that for those of you who do like that sort of humor, Jellystone delivers in spades. I mean, it is crazy the lengths they go to make the scenarios as absurd and ridiculous as possible, while still being family friendly. I should emphasize, this isn't necessarily a kids show. Kids can watch it, but it's clear that they also made it in mind that certain adults who are nostalgic for the Hanna-Barbera characters will probably be watching it as well. So I would call that a family show, a proper family show, kind of like what we used to get back in the 90s, where people design things with the idea of, okay, we're technically being told we're supposed to aim this at kids by the network, but we don't want to send the adults running, so let's make it for everybody in the family. And that's the sort of thing I can really get behind. It's the sort of thing I try to do with at least some of my entertainment. It doesn't always pan out that way, but at least with some of what I do, it's what I try to aim for. Yet I also find that Jellystone is a great example of how you can technically take something that is a classic, alter it sometimes to the point where it's beyond recognition, and yet still have it work. And the interesting thing is trying to figure out why that's the case. Because, like, I've been one of the people who, for years now, has been saying change is not always the best thing. Different is not a synonym for good. However, I've never said that different is a synonym for bad either. Different is just different. If you change something, that in and of itself is not necessarily the bad thing. The bad thing is if you change it for the worse. Think of it in terms of a food metaphor. Suppose you have a hamburger and you want to put something other than lettuce and tomato on it. So you decide, okay, I'll put, say, a nice fried onion ring on it, and maybe some ranch instead of ketchup and mustard. And you take a bite and you're like, oh, hey, that's actually delicious. That would be a good change. But now suppose on that same hamburger, instead of an onion ring and ranch dressing, you put rocks and crude oil. That would be a bad change. It would be different, yes, but it would be inedible. So often we're seeing people making changes that are skewing towards the bad side of things and then getting angry when people don't appreciate the changes they made and saying, oh, you just want things that are always the same. No, we don't want things that are exactly the same over and over again. What we want is a natural progression in the right direction. Or we want something that is different, but in a good way. Something that is at least on par with what got us into this thing in the first place. And I feel like Jellystone gets that. It gets that these characters have a fan base. They're not necessarily the craziest or biggest of fan bases, but they're part of the pop culture. So they have their fans, but they didn't want to just remake all the classic things. They wanted to put their own spin on it. And what they did was, they did some pretty big changes. Just putting all of these characters in one particular setting is itself a pretty big change. But like I said, some of these characters were completely overhauled. So why did they work? I've been trying to figure that out, and I think I've got an answer. Let's take Jabberjaw as an example, because Jabberjaw is one of the characters that was drastically altered. In the original series, I gotta be honest with you, the original Jabberjaw series is not one of the more original Hanna-Barbera series. In premise, it was a Scooby-Doo clone, in as much as it's about a group of young human teens and their mascot character. In this case, instead of people in the modern setting with a van and their giant talking dog, it's people in an underwater future society with a talking shark. And as far as Jabberjaw the character, he was basically Curly Howard from the Three Stooges. Same voice, same verbal tics, same penchant for slapstick, same mannerisms. He was not the most original of characters in any regard. The most original thing about the original Jabberjaw is that he's a shark, and that's about it. So of any character that was going to come forward into this new setting, they kind of had to make some kind of change. Because, I mean, something had to be new about him. So the new Jabberjaw is not only one of the female characters, she's now a sassy black woman who is a little boy crazy and not necessarily good with judgment, a little impulsive when it comes to executing plans for her own selfish desires. And that is essentially an original character. And even though technically you could say that they took an original character and just slapped it with a name from something they peeled off of something else, again, that original product was just 1/3 of the Three Stooges. It was already something that hadn't had its name applied to something else. So I say, given the choice between the two, it's not necessarily a bad thing that they decided to completely redo Jabberjaw. Now, on the other hand, of course, you have a character like Loopy-de-Loop, who you could potentially argue was a change for the worse, because the original Loopy had a more interesting and original premise. For those of you who don't know, the original Loopy-de-Loop is the big good wolf. That's the title that he wants to be known by, at least. Because everywhere he goes, he's perceived as the big bad wolf. Everyone thinks, oh, he's a wolf. Every story I have ever heard in my entire life paints a wolf as a bad guy, so he must be bad as well. And he's like, no, no, monsieur, I am a good man. I am a good wolf. See, I will help you. And then, because the universe hates him, things always wind up going wrong and he winds up looking bad anyway. Or sometimes people wind up taking advantage of him and using him in some sort of scheme because if he gets caught or if something bad happens to him, he's a wolf. Who's going to care? In some ways, you could say that Loopy-de-Loop is one of Hanna-Barbera's more political characters, because you could look at that and say, oh, that's an allegory for racism right there, just played out with a wolf instead of, say, a real-life human group. But, I mean, that was an interesting premise for the time, and certainly given the age that Loopy-de-Loop made his big premiere, it would have been relevant. Jellystone Loopy, again, is a character who was switched to female, and she is the original's polar opposite, practically. She's sarcastic, she's kind of deadpan, she couldn't care less about being perceived as nice, tends to encourage bad behavior and will engage in it herself. Yeah, she is also a completely different character. Everything about the original has been thrown out. But yet I still find myself liking this new character. Again, because she's original, and yet the scenario in which she exists kind of helps you get used to the idea of her being a different character who just happens to have the same name. And the fact that she's so often paired with Jabberjaw, and she provides an interesting foil to the shark, that also helps. So that's sort of a situational sort of thing. And I will admit that not every change works per se. Like, it felt kind of weird to have Magilla Gorilla be the one in charge of the fashion store when Snagglepuss was literally right there. But then again, maybe they didn't do that because it felt too obvious to have Snagglepuss be the fashionista. And Snagglepuss actually works as like a reporter of sorts in the town. So, I mean, they went against type at least. But of course, what really makes the show work is the fact that it is funny. It promises comedy and it delivers on comedy. And it's good comedy. The scenarios, despite being totally illogical, still have a natural flow where you start off with a basic idea and you just escalate it until you cannot escalate it anymore. And you can follow it all the way to the end and go, yeah, given that we've thrown out the real world laws of physics and any sense of rationality, I can see how we can get from point A to point B in this idea, and we'd be laughing the whole way through. So that is the real selling point. That is what really makes it work. These are talented people who are behind the show, who are doing their best to make it as good as possible. And yeah, some of the episodes don't work. That's the case with pretty much every series ever made. Even the best series ever made still has that one episode that, at the very least, wasn't as good as the others. But the majority of Jellystone really does work. And I hope it continues. I hope they keep making it for at least a little while longer. Because, honestly, do we need another Scooby-Doo cartoon? I mean, honestly, outside of Scooby-Doo, Hanna-Barbera hasn't really done much with their characters recently. In an age where reboots and remakes and nostalgia are the only thing Hollywood seems to care about, where has Hanna-Barbera been? I mean, they've made a couple of tries, but they haven't really worked. There was that live-action Yogi Bear movie, but the only thing people like about that is how eerily good Justin Timberlake did as Boo Boo, and beyond that, it's a total wash. There was the Banana Splits movie, or as it was originally called, Five Nights at Freddy's, and you can't tell me that's not how it started. And there's your problem right there. It's not really a Banana Splits movie. It was originally, I am convinced, meant to be something completely different, something that still played on nostalgia of a sort, but was horror. And so the only possible people it could appeal to is a very narrow group that knows both of these properties and knows just enough to realize that you should not combine them, but is still fascinated enough to want to see it to know how it turns out. Because people who like the original Banana Splits probably aren't going to have bothered with Five Nights at Freddy's. People who like Five Nights at Freddy's probably have never even heard of the Banana Splits. You have only that narrow margin in there, and that's not enough to really sustain the movie itself. There was an attempt to reboot the Flintstones called Yabba Dabba Dinosaurs, but Cartoon Network had so little faith in that after the first season was fully produced, it was canceled before it even had a chance to air, and the episodes only recently got dumped on HBO Max. I checked out a couple of them. They're bad, man. They are really bad, especially the animation. Like, it looks like late 90s Flash animation, but it was made in like 2018, so I have no idea how that happened. Heck, even look at Scoob. Yes, technically it's a Scooby-Doo movie, but in execution it's Hanna-Barbera Cinematic Universe Part 1, kind of like the 2017 Mummy or the 2019 Hellboy. It was designed to launch a shared universe with all sorts of sequels and spin-offs and everything, just using Scooby-Doo as the starting point. And I remember people saying that it did well, technically, and it got semi-positive reviews, at least as far as I saw. But we're a few years later, there's no sequel, there's no spin-offs, there's no shows. Scoob doesn't look like it went anywhere, and with it, all the other HBCU movies have died as well. So when you get right down to it, aside from continuing to wring everything they possibly can out of the Scooby-Doo franchise, Jellystone is kind of all that's left in terms of what Hanna-Barbera can do these days. And honestly, I think it's the best of the bunch. And I want to see it continue, I really do. Hence why I'm making this video, in the hopes that maybe it'll get the series a little more attention, and therefore it'll be able to last a little bit longer. That's my hope. But even if it doesn't, I'd say the episodes we got are still mostly really good. And, well, if it doesn't last beyond Season 2 or Season 1.5 or whatever the heck it is, I think it was still a fun ride. But seriously, I want it to continue. So, if you've checked out the show, feel free to leave your thoughts on it in the comments section, and otherwise, that's all for me for now. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books: Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.